I'm Andrew Hall, and this is Dead Hand Radio. My guest for this episode is author and musician Simon Maltman. Simon, a resident of Northern Ireland, writes crime fiction, hosts a tour called Belfast Noir, and has a love of music. He's an Amazon bestseller with 5 books and countless novellas in his catalog, and his most recent book, Witness, has received fantastic reviews. In this episode, Simon and I will be discussing music, noir fiction, and life in Ireland. Welcome to Dead Hand Radio, Simon. Can you hear me? Your audio just went mute. I can't hear anything. Yeah, you're completely muted, Simon. A little bit of technical difficulties at the moment, but we'll get through it. Sorry about that. No problem, Simon. Is your audio muted if you look on the menu down below? No, I can't hear anything you're saying now. Nothing. I see your video. Your video is working fine, but I don't hear anything. So maybe you need to adjust the microphone to come out of your video camera. Adjust your microphone to come through your video camera or your laptop microphone. No, still not working. And just hang in there, people, because this was working fine before we started the live stream. We'll get it sorted out just a second. We just got to figure out what something got tweaked on Simon's end when I played the video, I think. Nothing. You can drop from the live stream. There you go. And he'll be right back. Hopefully that'll reset his settings. Apologize for the technical difficulties, folks. Just hang with us. I'll put for those who are listening to this afterwards, I'll put a timestamp in the show notes so you can just navigate directly to it. Hey, Predator, thanks for being here, man. It's always good to see you. Simon had to drop off the live stream for a second to fix his audio, and we'll see if he's got any improvement.
Hi, is it any better?
Yes, that's better. I can hear you now.
Oh, thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
Can you hear me quite well now? Or?
I can hear you perfectly. Yes. And
thank goodness. You know, it hasn't rained here for about a week, and I think there's a bit of a storm that's just started up outside, so that might have something to do with it.
I see. Okay. Well, we have a couple people in the chat already, so if you guys are having any trouble hearing Simon or myself, please let us know. We can adjust it. That always helps us out. And if you guys have questions, feel free to throw those out there. But what we're going to do right now is talk a little bit about your background, Simon, and just tell me for starters, you could talk a little bit about your childhood growing up in Ireland. But what got you interested in writing and specifically crime noir?
Yeah. Well, I'm from a little town called Bangor. It's about 12 miles from Belfast. So it's a little seaside town. It's fairly quiet, but it's one of the bigger towns in Northern Ireland. But um, everywhere in Northern Ireland is really quite quite small. We've got less than 2 million people in the entire country, so we're very little. um, but yeah, I grew up during the Troubles. Um, as a kid through the 80s and then into the 90s. And I suppose living in Bangor, you're a little bit set aside from most of the violence. I'm sure most people would know about some of the things that be going on in the likes of Belfast and places like Derry. But Bangor was a little bit away from it, even though it was only 12 miles. But we still had our own sort of problems here. I mean, throughout Northern Ireland, even now, unfortunately, there's still quite a lot of paramilitary groups, and there would still be particular areas, particular estates around Bangor where you would have some of that. Um, but for the most part, it would be a much quieter sort of camera place. Although we had two large bombs during the Troubles, unfortunately, and it blew up the whole main street in the town.
Wow. Wow. And so did that impact your interest in writing? Did that directly motivate you to become a writer growing up in those troubled times?
Um, it's hard to say, I suppose, because there's so many little things, I suppose, impact on you, and some of them you're conscious of, and some not so much. Certainly, one thing I do remember is I went to the grammar school called Bangor Grammar, and there's a writer called Maurice Leach. Some people might have heard of, and he wrote a book in the 80s called Silver City, and it won a whole lot of prizes. And it was a book set in the sort of heart of the Troubles, and some of the discontent that was going on, and even within paramilitary groups, people on different sides of the same group. But he actually came out to our school to talk about writing when I was maybe about 15 or 16, and I remember buying his book at the time. And it's definitely the first time I thought to myself, oh, so people can be writers from Northern Ireland, or it's actually a job that people can have. Because certainly, um, in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of a lot of writers from here. There wasn't a lot of writing going on. The the odd thing was there were quite a lot of books set in Belfast during the 80s, but for people who sort of would study the history of literature and crime fiction in Northern Ireland, they would be rather unkindly referred to as Troubles trash these days,
Right.
because they tended not to be that good. Um, People would have maybe said they were kind of low bar sort of airport novels for the most part. You'd often get people from other countries writing about Northern Ireland, and they maybe had never been here, but it was just kind of an easy place. I suppose if someone was thinking to themselves, where could I set something dramatic? Oh, there's lots of bombs and crazy stuff going on in Northern Ireland. We'll set a thriller there. But unfortunately, they weren't. For the most part, they didn't tend to be very good. And none of them were written by anybody from here who sort of um, got the sort of the culture of it, and I suppose there's a very distinct style of talking, which is probably hard for some of your listeners to understand now. Northern Ireland doesn't sound like really other parts of Ireland, doesn't sound like other parts of the UK. We seem to speak very fast, and it can be quite a broad accent. It's kind of a mixture of the likes of Ulster Scots. We sort of have a couple of very well, two other languages really here. We have Ulster Scots, and we have Irish or Gaelic. Some people would speak, but it's very much a minority who would speak it. But I suppose historically, it's all kind of fed into the dialects. We have lots of weird ways of speaking, which can be a problem in the book sometimes, but particularly when I'm writing for audiences in other countries. You don't even notice most of the colloquialisms anymore, because it's just part and parcel of the way people speak here.
There
There's a very
was
distinct shorthand.
just on that note, when you're talking about the language and the words that are used in the language, uh, when I started reading your book Witness, and I think it was one of the early earlier pages of the book where these two guys are sitting in a car and they're looking out at a farmhouse, and you use the
Yeah,
word rendered. It looks like it was rendered recently, and
yeah,
in my opinion, or in my perception of that word, rendered, it means that it's been updated or modified in some way. And so I thought that was an interesting word to choose. But for you, for your culture and your use of the language, that's a perfectly appropriate word. So
yeah.
you do have to make exception when you're reading a book from a different culture because they use terms that are interchangeable, but you might not see it in a book written by an American author or even a British author.
Yeah, that's true, and we've got loads of ones like that. Like for instance, if I said I've got a skelf, you probably wouldn't know, what I was talking about. But it would just be like if you get a tiny bit of wood or something stuck in your finger, you say
Oh,
I've got a skelf.
splinter
Um,
is what we
a
would use.
splinter, yeah, essentially a splinter. And we've got like a million words for potato because obviously the Irish love eating potato. And obviously we call them chips. You'd be thinking we'd be talking about crisps. But if we
Oh
went
no,
over and
here
asked for
those
some,
are French fries.
yeah,
I know exactly what you're
if
talking about.
I went over and asked for some chips and just got some crisps, I'd be disappointed because I'd
Yeah.
be looking for more of a dinner. But
Yeah, I've seen people talking about that on Twitter before. I'd like to say hi to Rodrigo. Shout out to him for being here. Thank you. It's always great to see familiar faces in the chat room. If you guys have questions, drop them in there. We just
good stuff.
started the conversation and already went off onto our first little rabbit hole, talking about language, how the English language has so many variations, and whether you realize it or not, it has different dialects. Like what you were talking about. You're in Northern Ireland, and you have, well, Northern Ireland has its own language. I mean, is that true, or does Ireland have its own language
Well,
as a
well,
whole country?
well, I suppose technically, the main language would be English, and in the Republic of Ireland, it's also English, but like down south, all street signs would also be written in Gaelic.
Gaelic.
Um,
Okay.
Up north to a certain degree, some places would be. It's unfortunately it's um, one of the areas of disagreement at the minute, unfortunately, because I don't know how much of the press you get about our parliament. We have a parliament called
About that
Stormont.
much. We get zero press
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a pity because it is very hard to understand. We basically all of the nations in the UK now have devolved government. So our one is at Stormont. It's this lovely Parliament building we have in East Belfast, and that's where we have our assembly. So they're called MLAs, and we have a first minister and a deputy first minister. And because we're such a weird country, um, as part of the Good Friday Agreement, and then later on the St Andrews Agreement, and that you have to have sort of basically one unionist and one nationalist has to be either first minister or deputy first minister, and it's a joint role, so one's not meant to be more important than the other. So but then also we're ultimately ruled by Westminster as well. But we do have a devolved government, so we do have a say in a lot of things. But then the problem is they often don't get on. That's one thing that crashed Stormont a couple of years ago. We didn't have our government sitting. I don't even know if you got that report over there before COVID. We didn't have a government for about a year and a half, because they just wouldn't sit down together.
When was that?
Again, I suppose it was now happened about 3 years ago.
No,
And there was a
I don't
couple of
remember hearing that.
there's a couple of big things. There's a fight over an Irish Language Act where some people want there to be spend a lot of money on having things like signs and have more education about Irish language and have that side of the culture embraced more, and then other people are against it. We also had a massive heating scandal where there was this incentive, which then was referred to as cash for ash, because basically people were being paid to burn more fuel, and they were getting massive grants, and it was just a complete mess up. It cost our economy like millions, and we're a small economy. So that was another big
So
problem.
just to give people an idea of how small Ireland is, um, there are cities like the city Las Vegas that I live in has 2 million
Yeah,
people in this city,
yeah,
or in the Greater Valley. There are cities that are bigger than your entire population of your
uh,
country.
yeah. Like the whole of Northern Ireland is about 1.8 million, so it's not. It's not big anyway, but also we will have quite a lot of countryside, which is quite sparsely, populated as well.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and
you have
it
two
is,
or three big concentrations of population in these city centers where people live, and then the rest of the population is spread out really sparsely throughout the countryside, right?
yeah, that's right. There's a couple of we have an awful lot of what we call towns, which are really small. They're just tens of thousands, and then we've got the bigger cities like Belfast and Derry, and Lisbon's quite big, and then lots of towns. Like I live in a kind of big town, but it's still, it's only in the thousands, so it's not big by any scale. But even though we've got very few people, we still can't agree on very much, unfortunately. So that's why often we don't have a government that's working, so which can be frustrating.
Well,
Although I actually
that goes to, I mean, the history of Ireland, and I'm not a scholar on Irish history, but going back for centuries, there has been strife and disagreement throughout the population of Ireland, not just
yeah,
Ireland versus other countries, but Ireland versus Ireland. They have
yeah,
had long time disagreements on so many different things. Is that true?
yeah, and I mean, uh, I mean, it's always been completely tied to the history of England and the United Kingdom, but particularly because if you look at the likes of Henry VIII and then the Stuarts, um, the monarchs kept on changing which religion they were, and every time they did that, it really messed up things, particularly in Ireland. So one minute you'll have a Catholic king, uh, and the Protestants won't be treated very well, and then you'll have a Protestant king, and then all of the Catholics are repressed, and people think there's a Catholic hiding under every bed to attack you, and the Pope's the Antichrist and all that sort of thing, and then the next minute it goes the other way. So it's always yo-yoed, and then Ireland's always been used as a bit of a punch bag, and sadly it's still being used as a punch bag, because I'm sure you've heard a little bit about, about Brexit and the impact. I know Joe Biden's been speaking about that recently, and the presidents have always been very good at trying to be involved in the politics over in Northern Ireland. I can still remember Clinton coming over and having a honk on a saxophone and whatnot, all around the time when we were first getting peace. But it is still, is always on a bit of a knife edge. And unfortunately, Brexit, the majority of people in Northern Ireland wanted to remain part of the EU, and it complicates for things very much further, because the south of Ireland, the Republic, is still in the EU, and
Oh,
we want to be
wow.
in the EU, but we're not allowed to be in the EU because the rest of Britain, well, Scotland didn't want to be in the EU either, but England and Wales voted for Brexit, and so they've pulled us all out of it, and it's just making a mess. And the really weird thing is that the very sort of right wing unionists who want to be remain part of the UK all voted to leave Brexit. But what it's actually now made is that there's all these different agreements with the EU. So there's a kind of like a border now down the Irish Sea. I'm sure most people know the Irish Sea goes there between England, Scotland, and Wales, and then Ireland on the left. Um, but what that essentially does is create a border within the United Kingdom. And for unionist people who are all about, protecting their place in the United Kingdom, that's horrifying. But ironically, they're the ones who also voted for it, which has that implication. So it's just very it's very odd, very
So let
confusing.
me let me just clear something up in my own mind. There's a Northern Ireland and an Ireland, or a Greater Ireland. Um,
Yeah.
are they are
Hmm.
they governed by two different governments, or is it one government that governs the whole?
No, no, it's completely separate. Um, so going back to I think it was 1801, the Act of Union, um, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland all became part of the United Kingdom, and then there's been various uprising, and then obviously there was the likes of the Easter Rising. I'm sure you probably know about 1916, which really led to a further push on Ireland wanting to leave the United Kingdom. But because the North, where I live, because we've always had such links with the United Kingdom and Ulster Scots, there were the plantations where particularly Scottish people came across and landed here and brought the Protestant religion with them. Um, because a lot of people feel very connected to the United Kingdom, they didn't want Ireland to leave. So that's why what happened in 1921, it's the 100th anniversary this year, is that Ireland was just chopped off the north. Although they're kind of chopped off, so there's part of the northwest is Southern Ireland. So I would talk about going down south, but where I'm actually going is northwest. But you talk about I'm going down south because that's part of the Southern Ireland. But
Yeah.
but Southern Ireland, or also known as a republic, or used to be known as a free state or era, it is a completely separate state, so it has nothing now to do with the United Kingdom. But the odd thing then is in the Republic's declaration is that they want there to be a united Ireland, and at any point there's a majority up here want it, we would then supposedly be part of that Ireland. But then there's the very hardline contingent up here of unionists, and they want to never be connected to the South. So
Wow.
it probably seems strange to people from other countries, but I mean, there's still probably a majority of people in Northern Ireland are much more connected to the land across the sea, and that's who their allegiance is to, and they don't, and often they can be quite hostile to the part of Ireland that we are obviously physically connected to, and culturally connected to. I'm one of those people who think there's kind of more important things in life
Absolutely.
than that, and I feel very much connected to my area, and I like this part of the world, but I don't feel particularly connected to either one. I actually feel connected to the place I'm in, and I don't. If it ends up being United Ireland, that's fine by me. What I would worry about is it would just be the reverse of the Troubles. So it would be the loyalists, Protestants would uprise, and it would just be blood on the streets again, unfortunately. So I don't know what the solution. I don't know what the solution is, but it's just a pity. I mean, it's literally you either go left or you go right. There's no real middle ground. We're still in a very weird limbo for the last 25 years, where we're kind of all getting on to a point, I suppose, politicians wise. But it's kind of impossible. Like Northern Ireland, as I said, it's less than 2 million. We couldn't be an independent country either because we're too small.
Yeah, you would still
So
have to
it's
have ties, but it would be helpful to have ties with the EU, like Southern Ireland
yeah,
has. Um,
yeah,
but to completely divest yourself from the economy of the UK would probably be detrimental to the entire country. It would probably hurt the country more than
yeah,
help it.
yeah.
Just a point
Yeah.
to the chat. Predator says he's from Romania. It's the same with Romania and Moldova. So I guess there's a division in that country
Yeah.
similar to what's going on in Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, it is very strange, and the weird thing is, people are very split up here. Some people want there to be a vote on whether we would leave the United Kingdom, but it wouldn't be a simple thing because it would be the first time the North would have left since 1801, and the first time it would join the South in 100 years. So it would be a crazy big thing to happen. Um,
Well, I think you
but
made
who knows?
I think you made a very important statement in that it would be the reverse of the Troubles, where there would
Yeah,
be blood in the street again, because you would have one group of people who would be so um, disenfranchised that they would feel like their only recourse is to resort to violence,
yeah.
and that's never a good thing.
Unfortunately,
Yeah. And then you start
yeah.
having the deaths and the bombings pile up again, and um, that's never going to resolve anything. So,
No, and
uh,
most sort of rational people here don't want that and don't look for that. But unfortunately, there is still um, inbuilt divisions throughout the community. People still think we refer to it as orange or green. The orange is the kind of Protestant or the green nationalist, and unfortunately, our politics, they spend all the time just talking about those issues and making everything political in a kind of sectarian sense, rather than just getting on with trying to fix things, which is a pity. But at least, I mean, it is still better than it was 30 years ago. We could say
Yes.
that.
Right.
Uh,
And in that respect, the last 20, 22, 23 years since the what was the ceasefire called? Good Friday or something like that?
Good Friday Agreement, yeah.
Right. So since then, has the economy gotten stronger, and have businesses been able to thrive during the past 23, 24 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's been incredible. Like the Belfast I knew as a child is incomparable. Like Belfast is, it's nice being seen as one of the top city breaks around the world. It's really come up. We've got all sorts of going on. There's so many new sort of architecture and music halls and sort of developments around marinas and just tons of well before COVID, but tons of festivals on all the time. Um, Tours and the likes of there's like a big Titanic museum. We've done a lot more with the likes of the Giant's Causeway and various other museums, and then we've had a big boom for business because people now want to invest here because we seem to be still quite cheap and they can get different tax breaks. And one of the big things has been the film industry, which we didn't have anything to
Cool.
do with the film industry really. But now Game of Thrones was a game changer. They were here filming through a large part of the year for 10 years, and then there's been lots of other movies now, and there's meant to be some other HBO productions are going to come over, and we've got an old paint hall beside where the Titanic was built, and it's a really cool new studio, and they've filmed lots of movies over there, like the City of Ember with Tim Robbins, things like that. And there's a big crime show. It's the biggest show in the UK called Line of Duty. I don't know if you get that over
Say it again.
there. Line of Duty. It's a cop show.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
You don't get that. But it's all filmed here. So it's very up and coming in that way. Um,
Well, there's one thing that can be said that's indisputable about Ireland, that the countryside in Ireland is absolutely breathtaking.
yeah,
You cannot think about Ireland without thinking about a majestic island in you know that's broken off from Europe, but it's just
yeah,
this magical place, right? I mean, in my
yeah,
mind, that's the way I think of Ireland.
yeah. And it is true that even when you know it yourself and you're flying home from somewhere, it is kind of staggering when you fly over Ireland. It is literally so green. It's because it rains all the time. It's raining outside now. But it is incredibly green, and we are very lucky that we still have a lot of countryside that isn't built on. There's a lovely drive. I'm sure you know of the Giant's Causeway, all up where our Antrim coast, and it's all kind of cliff edges. And it's beautiful, and you can just see right out to the sea.
Yeah.
And there's so lovely cliffs. There's the Carrickary rope bridge and things like that around there. It is really nice, and it's something that definitely inspires me. I always get a lot about the Northern Ireland countryside and some of the places I like to see. I always try and get them into the books because I think they do help capture a bit of a part of the place. It definitely has an impact on the people. And like I said, for whatever reason, the people in Northern Ireland do have a certain way about them, uh, the humour is a particular thing here. It's a very scathing humour. I suppose you would maybe call it banter, but it's almost to the point of other people would probably think you're just being incredibly rude to each other. But I suppose that's how you show you like someone over here. It's called you banter with them, but or it's called you give them a slagging. So people would say you're sort of teasing them, but it can
Okay.
be quite brutal.
It sounds to be well. Okay, so I've heard people that have visited Ireland that say that the people there are just very welcoming. Very they
Yeah, it's true.
appreciate tourists who come into the country, and they're very welcoming and very friendly to people from outside the country. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And the tourist industry has really increased. Um, and they very much are getting people now from all around the world. and I think you mentioned I do a tour called the Belfast Noir tour. I started that with a local company a few years ago, and just because I have started doing a few tours like around Game of Thrones and some cultural sort of tours, but there wasn't really one covering the wider Belfast, and there wasn't one talking about some of the crime shows and I suppose the boom in crime fiction that we've seen, which I'm a part of in a small way. In the last 10 years, there's been this explosion in crime fiction writers, and for a very small country, we suddenly have like all these New York Times bestsellers and whatnot all in this tiny little area, which is wonderful. Like it is a really vibrant local writing scene, and everybody's sort of very supportive and welcoming of each other.
There's a term for the type of crime novels that are coming out of Ireland. What's that term? It starts with a
Um,
U.
yeah, sometimes it'd be called Ulster Noir.
That's it.
um,
Can you talk
so
about that
just
and
for
what
the
exactly that is?
yeah, well, Ulster Noir. I suppose it's the easiest way for just talking about the Northern Ireland crime fiction because it's a bit weird again the way our borders are. Ulster is a province, and Northern Ireland has only six counties, although part of them are in Ulster. So part of Ulster is actually in the Republic of Ireland, which is confusing, but
That is
it serves
confusing.
to it serves for a broad kind of description. Or sometimes people would talk about the whole of Ireland and would talk about Emerald Noir, which can be easier because then you can just include everything. But basically, like I was saying, in the 80s there wasn't much of a local scene, and then in the early 90s, sort of coming up to the Good Friday Agreement, we started to have a few writers breaking through. I don't know if these are writers you would have heard of or not. One of the big ones was Colin Bateman. Um, he's a writer
I
from
have heard of
Bangor,
Bateman, yes.
and he writes a lot of screenplays these days. But his breakthrough novel was called Divorcing Jack. There was also there was a movie made of that, and he mostly writes movies now. Actually, he actually wrote there's a movie called The Journey, which is sort of is based on when Martin McGuinness from Sinn Féin and Ian Paisley, who was the big Protestant sort of preacher and very controversial figure on the other side. It's when they first got together in the early 2000s and actually worked in the devolved government because they had never even spoken. They had refused to even ever speak to each other, never mind talk to each other or discuss anything. And then all of a sudden, they became first and deputy first ministers, which is kind of like being the kind of joint prime minister of the country. And the really heartening thing about it was that they were complete, they were complete enemies, like old enemies, and yet they actually got on like a house on fire. And they were only in office together for about a year and a half, but so much footage of them just laughing together all the time, which nobody could have ever imagined. The hatred that was on both sides for decades, and to the point where they were referred to in the press as the Chuckle Brothers. Yeah.
So, talk a little bit about your tour. A little bit more about your tour. What it takes place in Belfast? How many locations do you visit, and what's the topics that you discuss during the tour? And also,
Yeah, well,
did you start the tour yourself, or are you partnered up with a different company?
yeah, well, it started. It was an idea I had, and I just started developing what I wanted to have in it, just through my own interest and my own research. And I started going around Belfast and working out how it would actually function. And then I approached a few tour operators because I had no background in tour companies. My background was just in the writing area, and being a fan of crime fiction and I suppose more things to do with music. But I just thought it was something that could really work and might interest people who, particularly because crime fiction is becoming so popular and we have such a connection to it here now. And I approached a company called Belfast Hidden Tours. They do different bespoke tours. They would do the tours of Belfast. They would do a Peace Walls tour where you go and see all the murals and the history of that. And so it just worked really well. So I partnered up with them, and I would sort of do it through them, and then we would do regular tours and then get booked for different festivals. But the main thing that I suppose I wanted to get across was talking about the local writers. So the likes of Colin Bateman spearheaded it, Owen McNamee as well. He wrote a well-known book in the early 90s. And then that was kind of pushing it forward. And now we've had a lot of really top writers, like Stuart Neville, Steve Catlett, Brian McGillivray. They've all been like New York Times bestsellers. Um, and everybody knows each other. I mean, there's just tons of great writers. If you ever get, I mean, I've got a blog actually where I go through a lot of the same. There's dozens of great writers now. I'm sure I'll leave people out, but there's so many like Jared Brennan, Kelly Crichton, um, Sharon Dempsey, and there's just loads. And everybody's got a slightly different version of crime fiction than anybody else. It's all the kind of subgenres. And the interesting thing is that to a large degree, most people don't want to write about the troubles, so it tends to be just your average day murders and crimes rather than anything related to Northern Ireland politics. Although there's exceptions, you might know Adrian McKinty. He had a big hit with the American set The Chain last year, and it was on the Tonight Show and things like that. But he wrote a series based in the 80s to do with a Catholic special branch officer living in a little town called Carrick in Northern Ireland. They're very funny, and they're just really good mysteries. So some people do touch on the troubles.
On the tour, when do you introduce people to these authors, or do you take your tour people to locations where the authors hang out, or places that are mentioned in the books, some stuff like that?
It's a bit of all that. So, we would go around some of the locations that are in the books, and there's also a lot of locations. For instance, there was a very famous film noir called Odd Man Out. It was directed by Carol Reed, who went on to make The Third Man with Orson Welles, and he made Oliver as well, the famous musical. And he filmed that all around Belfast, and there's a lot of sort of famous locations we would visit. I don't know if you ever heard of the Crown Bar. It's an old Victorian gin palace in the centre of Belfast. It always gets showed up on any travel log. It always pops up in different movies. I think it was popped up in the likes of The Devil's Own with Brad Pitt. I think it was in there. It's been in Colin Bateman's Divorce and Jack. It's been in the Odd Man Out movie. So we'd visit places like that. We'd visit City Hall. There's a famous hotel which has been featured in a lot of literature and films called the Europa. And sadly for them, its reputation is that it's the most bombed hotel in the whole of Europe.
Wow.
Which isn't the best accolade. I think it was
Does that mean
36 times.
Does that mean it's been bombed? It's been bombed more than any other location?
More than any other hotel, specifically in Europe. So I think 36 times. And I would also visit the likes of, we've got a lovely city hall in the centre. It was blown up, but definitely it was blown up during the Belfast Blitz. So we'll talk a little bit about the Belfast Blitz. I mean, there's a lot of history in Belfast, and then across the road from the city hall, there's a bank called the Northern Bank. And there's a really good documentary. I don't know if you can get it over there on Netflix, or on BBC as well, I think, about it. And just after the Good Friday Agreement, there was the biggest heist in all of UK and Irish history in the Northern Bank, and they just emptied it of millions and millions. And it's pretty much known that it was probably the IRA who actually did it, even though they were meant to be on a ceasefire. And nobody has ever been charged, and the money's never been found.
Since you mentioned the IRA, are they still in existence, or have they pretty much disbanded?
Well, the IRA, who most people would refer to as the IRA, through the ones through the 70s, 80s, 90s, they would sometimes be called the Provos, the Provisional IRA, and they were the IRA because there were historical IRAs before them, and they were meant to have been on a ceasefire and still on a ceasefire. So the people involved with that would have been the likes of Martin McGuinness, Jerry Adams, although he always says he never was part of the IRA, but I'm not sure anybody believes that.
I think they were primarily flagged as a terrorist group, weren't they?
Yeah, so they would have been the ones responsible for the bombings and the murders, but their members were also then linked with Sinn Féin, and many of them were prosecuted and were imprisoned. And then after Good Friday, again, it's probably hard to understand, but after the Good Friday Agreement, part of the term was all the murderers and killers from both sides who had done the things they've been accused of, they were just all set free from their sentences and just put back on the streets. but that was the only way we were going to get peace. So most people, we had a vote in the country, and you could either vote to try for peace or just vote and say no, I can't give these things up. And that was the main thing that people found hard, to let out all the murderers from both sides. But that's what did happen. And now a lot of the murderers are politicians, which is a strange situation to be in.
Yeah, well, it's it is confusing because it was if it's technically a war, then those are they're borderline crimes against humanity or war crimes, but they are also, because you're perpetrating crimes against non-combatants, and that's not supposed to be allowed. So
Yeah,
that's where people
I
get
think
this gray area where they don't really, it's not combatant against combatant or army against army.
no,
It's people attacking
no, no, no,
civilians,
no, no,
terrorism basically.
no, no. Yeah, but that's it, because certainly from a British government point of view, the IRA they're an illegal paramilitary group who aren't fighting on behalf of a country or for a government or anything, and so they wouldn't view it as a war. They would view it as dealing with terrorists, the same as Al Qaeda or anybody else. And to a certain degree, that is true, but I can see other sides. But I
Absolutely.
suppose the other big difference,
I do as well.
other big difference is that the IRA did. Yes, many of the attacks were literally just trying to kill as many people as possible, including just ordinary men, women, and children. And the likes of the big Omar bomb certainly was a turning point where people were like, this is not you fighting any kind of war. You're just blowing up children on a Saturday afternoon. So I think that is, I suppose, where the differences would lie.
So the organization as a legitimate body of um, governance in any way, does it exist in any way, or has it been pretty much dismantled? And I know that there's still violence in the country,
Yeah.
but that violence, is it more from an underground source, or do the IRA claim these continuing atrocities?
Well, the sort of official provisional IRA are not meant to be uh, any kind of entity anymore. I mean, some people on the extreme unionist side would say Sinn Féin is just the IRA and is just a political wing of the IRA, and that there's still a war council. I don't think there probably is, but there are other paramilitary groups who would use the word IRA, like there's Continuity IRA and IRA this, IRA that. Sometimes it might just be a group of a few people. It's hard to know, but unfortunately, in the very extreme communities we have on both sides, it's the same on the other side with the likes of the UDF and the UDA. You'll still have active people there, but a lot of the time it's people kind of pushing all the kids. So we've had a lot of rioting recently where you have kids in the street fighting with police and throwing petrol bombs and breaking into places and whatnot. But often it's the older people and who should know better in the communities who are kind of like giving them some of the weapons and pushing them on the streets just to cause disruption. Particularly at the minute because we've got this real problem with Brexit and having a sea border that's really splitting people either side again.
Yeah. I mean, to figure out the solution to these issues, it seems like you're standing at the base of Mount Everest, looking up at the top, and you want to get there, but getting to that point, you can't do it alone. You have to have cooperation. You have to make concessions. Yeah, you have to be flexible. There's a lot of things at play. Yeah, all I can do is say, good thoughts to your country, and hopefully
Thanks.
the people that you guys vote into office. Now, you guys are a democracy, right? You vote for whoever goes in to represent you, aren't you?
Yeah. We vote for all our local councils and to the various political parties, and then we vote for our member of parliament who goes over to Westminster in the different areas, and then we also vote for the politicians that go in the Stormont who have the devolved government. But sadly here, people generally just vote left or right. So and at the minute it's the two extreme parties. So on one side you've got Sinn Féin, on the other side you have the DUP, and they're both very extreme in different ways. Yeah. And then you've got the moderate parties who I would prefer there's like a party called Alliance, and they're very much we just want the best for everybody, and we want to work with both sides. So I like that. And the likes of the Green Party would be similar to that, and I suppose would have a bit of a more liberal outlook. Um, so unfortunately, it has polarized things that now both the extreme both sides are always fearful that they're going to lose whatever country they want to be a part of, so they go to the more hardline parties,
Hmm.
and unfortunately they disagree on
Yeah,
on
politics
those things.
is an ugly business. I don't normally talk about politics, and the reason that it's okay to talk about it in this situation is because it's such an impactful issue in your country. Um,
Yeah,
and you and I sitting here talking about it is not going to solve anything, but it's helping me understand how the
yeah,
country how the country works. Um, but so I
mm,
mean to put it back to a positive note, the economy is on the rise. You have a growing artistic culture and literature culture
yeah,
that's growing. That these are all excellent things, and
mm,
hopefully that momentum will continue and bleed over into the political side of things, and people will start to
yeah. I
understand if we
mean,
work together. There's so much potential.
yeah, very much so. Because I mean, like we've got a very good sort of level of living here. You know, even compared to the rest of the UK. I mean, the people here are fairly well off with what amenities they have and the money and the economy. I mean, it is good. So it's people are always fearful that they don't want to be pulled back to the bad days because it's a real bustling, it's a real multicultural place now. Um, and there's so many people visit and do business here, and like you say, the arts have really exploded in writing, but also music. I mean, we've always had some big hitters, like the likes of Van Morrison and Rory Gallagher was sort of from out west, and people like Gary Moore. But then more recently, we'll have the likes of Snow Patrol. Have been a really big band. They're actually from Bangor as well. And there's just a lot of music going on, a lot of cool stuff, a lot of art, and people just getting more involved in the arts,
Yeah.
which they didn't used to be. I mean, there used to be curfews. You used to have police checks every time as a child you walked into the city centre. You had to be searched for bombs. Every shop you went into, you were searched for bombs because people would put incendiary devices and clothes and burn down the shops. You know, uh, police and army were on every corner. So it's completely different now.
Hmm. Let's see. We just had Jack Ryan jump in. He's a regular in the chat also. Hey, Andrew, I appreciate the different types of folks you have on your show. UFOs can get a little repetitive. Agreed. 100%, Jack. Thank you for your comment and thank you for being here. And Predator from Romania says, did you have a referendum to leave UK like Scotland had?
Um, no, and that's what a lot of people are calling for because it's meant to be whatever the polls suggest that there's roughly half the people do want to leave, then that's when they'll have it. But I suppose that's where we would have a problem if it was only around half wanted us to then revert to being part of Ireland and leave the United Kingdom for the first time in hundreds of years. That's when it would be a real problem if it's only around 50% because then it's only going to be the reverse, unfortunately. So a lot of people don't want us to have that. But because of these effects, like Brexit is having this big impact on us. If Scotland are pushing for another referendum, if Scotland left the United Kingdom, definitely it would put more pressure on here considering it. And Brexit and things connected to it, you really could see the United Kingdom splintering up in our lifetimes. You know, quite possibly it might well happen. We don't know. Um, but because it's so difficult, I don't know whether. I mean, Britain certainly wouldn't be keen on granting there to ever be a border poll. So well, that's what they would call it, a border poll of whether you would leave or not. But then the ironic thing is that most people who I know down south, part of the Republic, they don't really care about the North, and they don't really feel that connected to us, even though it's technically meant to be their country's ideal. You know, from when it started, that it would be we would be put back together one day. But most average person down south refer to us as those Nordies, referred to as Nordies who are always squabbling and fighting with each other, and we're probably quite expensive as well. So the ironic thing is that most people down south probably don't want us, and also if we did join down south, we would probably all also be financially worse off. So there's so many things that would come into play. So you just wouldn't know what way it would go because people would sometimes vote with their head as well, thinking, well, does it really matter to me that much? Do I want to lose a lot of money and have chaos?
I mean,
uh,
it's really not that hard to see both sides, or more than two sides. I mean, there's multiple sides here, and it's really not that hard if you're empathetic to your fellow human beings to see where
hmm
each side is coming from. Um,
Yeah.
and the best solution is a peaceful solution. So whatever you need to do
Mhm.
to have peace, so that during peacetime you can have these cultural revolutions, or,
Yeah.
or renaissance, I guess is a better word, cultural renaissance, which is what you guys are experiencing there in Northern Ireland right now, and that's awesome. I
Yeah.
mean, that
hmm
could be almost like a blueprint for other countries that are having this type of strife to just have peace, so that your culture can then start to expand and grow. And out of that,
Yeah.
good things are going to happen.
Yeah. No, 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 very much so. And hopefully, because everybody has had a good taste of it now for 20 years or whatnot, hopefully most people will want to embrace that.
Yes,
It's just trying not to let it get out of hand again, hopefully.
right. I do hope so, because tourism is a good industry to have in your country. And when your country is in the middle of a conflict, a violent
Yeah.
conflict like Ireland had for 30 years, the tourism industry is going to suffer. The arts and culture
Yeah.
industry is not going to blossom. I mean, you're going to have art movements, but those are underground and they're very small. They're not going to explode like it is now. Um, so yeah, I mean, whatever you can do to have peace, that's I think that's what is the most important thing. Um,
Yeah, and it's strange because tourism, though people wouldn't have thought it in the past, has become one of our primary earners because
yeah,
we were very much an industrial country and city in the past. We had a massive linen industry. Shipbuilding was huge, obviously building the Titanic, but there was so many ships that were built here in Harlem and Wolff. We used to have a big bombardier factory, which has shrunk to making airplanes and things like that. In the past, there would have been like cigarette factories and all sorts. But all that stuff is a massive rope works, like in the 1800s and whatnot. But all that is completely gone, and it's all disused buildings and other things. But now one of the big things that it is the likes of tourism, and certainly aside from anything else, nobody wants any of the problems coming back. But obviously, it would also greatly affect that. I mean, obviously, COVID is now already greatly affected that. Obviously, there hasn't been any tourism, so it was just kind of getting somewhere. So hopefully, it can all slip back in. And actually, just this week, we've come out of our lockdown since Christmas, and I've got my first couple of tours booked in coming up, which is nice. So I'm gonna have to do a bit of revision because I haven't done a tour now in a year and a half. So I'm gonna have to go back through all my notes, see if I can remember all my dates and names of architects and things. I'll be rusty.
and you're also a musician. So do you play gigs for to earn part of your income?
Yeah, I would do it part time, and so that was another problem because I lost all my tours, lost all my gigs from COVID, and that was obviously a pity. It couldn't be helped, but just this week, yeah, I've just started getting bookings again for gigs. I would do my own music, but it wouldn't be really like sort of commercially wise, just for my own enjoyment, and do some gigs that way. Sometimes I link it in with writers. I've got a friend, Jared Brennan. He's a very good local writer, and we would sometimes do writing events. And instead of just doing the usual reading and Q&A, would then sometimes bring the guitars and play a couple of kind of crime-related songs and things like that. But the main music I would do like sort of covers gigs, like party band type things. So on the weekends. So yeah, I haven't
Can't
had
go
any of
wrong
those
with
now for a
those,
year and a half.
especially the classics, right?
Oh yeah, it's a bit of everything, but I particularly enjoy when we get to bust out a bit of the Beatles and a bit of Elvis, Suspicious Minds, and I quite like doing all that. And there's a big there's a lot of it's funny in Northern Ireland there's certain pockets who really love American country music. In general, it's not a massive thing in Northern Ireland, but in the country areas in Northern Ireland, they absolutely love. Like we always have to sing stuff like Country Roads and Sweet Home Alabama. Uh,
So that's
it,
oh, great songs, by the way. But that doesn't surprise me because when you listen to Irish music, it sounds
yeah,
very bluegrassy. So bluegrass music in
mhm,
the U.S. is kind of country without the
yeah,
bass or without the drums.
yeah,
So you don't have
yeah,
any percussion in bluegrass, which is really similar in my mind to what the way Irish music sounds.
yeah. There definitely is. I remember, I think it was in reading Johnny Cash's autobiography, and I think his ancestors were Scottish, and it is interesting how there is those kind of links. You know, it's just a different type of traditional music, I suppose.
Hmm.
And again, with folk music in England, I suppose folk music in America, there's all similar links.
Yeah.
And then I suppose blues is a form of folk. I mean, I love blues, and I suppose it's a form of folk music in a just on a different structure, I suppose, really. But it all kind of links together.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, music is a staple, and um, I mean, I enjoy so many different types of music. I could listen to just about any kind of music at any time, um,
Yeah,
with exception. Sometimes heavy metal gets a little bit harsh for me to listen to now, but when I was a kid, I
yeah,
used to love heavy metal. You know,
yeah. I like
I
a wee bit of
still
metal.
I still love Iron Maiden, but sometimes like uh, like Judas Priest might be a little bit too heavy for me, or some of the newer heavy metal stuff, um,
Yeah,
like Metallica, gets a little bit. Uh, there's times where I can listen to it, and times where I want to listen to something more mellow. But I could really
yeah,
listen to just about anything.
yeah. I suppose because from when I grew up too, I'm still a big fan of a lot of the grunge bands. A little bit of Alice in Chains and obviously Nirvana and Mudhoney and Screaming Trees, all that type of stuff.
How about Pearl Jam and
Yeah, I lived
you,
with Pearl Jam. I lived Mad Season, the spin off they did as well, and Walking Papers. They're like a more recent band with some of those grunges in it. I really like their stuff. Anything that has a bit of a swagger, bit of blues rock, you know, I love all that type of thing.
yeah, yeah, and and blues is like it to me. It seems like it's where it all started. Now, folk music was around before blues, but blues music is kind of the catalyst for rock and roll and just about every iteration
Yeah,
of rock, um, that has come after that. Punk rock, uh, uh, oh, what did you call it? Grunge music. All those types of music have their roots in blues music. So,
yeah,
like we talked about a little bit earlier, I can listen to blues anytime, any day. That's
yeah.
my
I
favorite.
mean, it absolutely is like the foundation of all that. It still seems weird to me. I mean, I like a lot of the bands I suppose that would have been called, you know, the British Invasion, the likes of the Yardbirds and the Stones and the Animals.
Yep.
But it's funny still that they seem to really help get the reputations up for the likes of, you know, Howlin' Wolf and Johnny Lee Hooker and Muddy Waters, because weirdly they weren't settling masses, but they were so popular in England.
Right.
Particularly because all these guys are name checking them and were covering their songs, and then when they came over here, they were being greeted like rock stars,
Yeah.
rightfully so. But for some reason, yeah, it haven't taken off quite in the same way.
Who
I'm
would
just
you
gonna put my
say?
charger in. I've
Oh,
I've
sure.
just got a notification saying you're running low.
No problem. While you're doing that, if I could ask you another question, you could think about it. But so,
Yep.
of all the musical uh, influences that have been around you know for the decades, uh, who would you say is your number one influence?
Oh, out of
Uh-oh. Uh-oh, we lost him. He'll be back. But so in the meantime, fun fact, Ireland has the best water that I've ever drank. That's pretty cool. Cranberries and the Zombie is a great song. Yeah, Zombie by the Cranberries. That is a great song. Um, Hopefully he realizes that he dropped out and will come back in. But just in case, I'm going to send him a text message. And okay, he dropped out for real this time, and he'll be back in shortly. So, just want to say that while we're waiting for him to get back in, Ireland is just an interesting country. He had asked me previously about some items in the news or press that uh, has happened over there in Ireland and in the U.S. because we have a free and open press. You would think that that type of stuff gets into our news cycles, but it really doesn't. Um, the only thing that you hear in the news cycles over here in the U.S. are things that directly affect the U.S. And one of the things that frustrates me greatly about the U.S. press corps is that they will cover celebrity news and um, things that are just unimportant that nobody really cares about, but they won't cover stuff about other countries that impact millions of people in a negative or positive way. So, welcome back, Simon.
Oh, is
Give
it
me a
working
mic check.
again?
Huh?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, loud
Hello?
and clear.
Oh, thank goodness. I don't know what happened there. It was starting to say my battery's fully charged, but I must be eating the juice.
Yeah, so I don't know. As soon as you plugged in, it looked like the screen went blank. So I just did a little monologue until you got back. I talked about you
Thank
behind
you.
your back, but I
Sorry
didn't say
about
anything negative.
that. Cheers.
So yeah,
So,
the last question I asked you was who is the biggest influence in as far as music in your life?
oh, goodness, it's so hard. There's so many people I love, but definitely when I was a kid, I got really into Elvis. I remember when I was 8, I got my first guitar and got a couple of lessons. And I think it was just because it was cassettes that was hanging about my parents' house. That's what I was listening to. I just loved Elvis, so I don't think any of my friends probably understood that. But that's what and I also just loved 60s music growing up. Listening to the old Beatles records. I've still got loads of my parents' old 45s and stuff. I like collecting a bit of vinyl, so I've still got all the old ones. And I've got a real love of that 60s period, like the Yardbirds of the Sound about. And I suppose grunge are definitely, like I was saying, I love a lot of that. I love tons of blues, like Harlem Wolf. I love that type of stuff. But also, on particular days, I'll really into jazz. I'll go through phases of being mad into jazz, and then I'll go through times where I won't listen to anything. But sometimes it's the only thing that will give me the kick I'm after, the like sort of a bit of hard bop from Art Blakey and the jazz message, something like that. But yeah, no, I think that's the thing. It's just that I do enjoy just all different types of music as well.
Yeah, I agree, man. I like I said, I listen to all different types of music, all different genre. I mean, even banda music, which is Hispanic type of music, where they have this. I think it's
Yeah,
called the xylophone. And these guitars, lots of flamenco style guitar playing. I mean, just any kind of
cool.
music. Um, and I have to be in the mood for certain music at certain times, though.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Well,
so
absolutely. I mean,
I was going to change gears a little bit and go into some different topics because Ireland, being a very ancient country, I would put it in the same uh, category as the Great Britain and Scotland. I mean, there have been castles there, there have been civilization there for
oh yeah,
thousands of years. Are there still castles that were built in the like 200 or 300 years after. Uh, so in the UK, I have a friend who lives in England, and he lives near a castle that's like 1,200 years old. Is there anything like that
yeah.
over there in Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, there'd be some. I mean, a lot of the castles we have, um, well, I mean, some of them would be Norman castles, so yeah, they are pretty old. There's a massive castle called Carrickfergus, and it's in really good shape still. I mean, you can go around all the top parts and everything. we do have a lot of castles. Some of them, there's one called Dunluce Castle. It's another one we had there was the likes of John de Courcy, who's one of the people who was over sort of in the more ancient Irish history. But there's loads of ruins. There's lots of very old kind of medieval ruins, and then I suppose there's a whole mix. I mean, there's lots of kind of like ruins and old monasteries. We've got quite a lot of very early monasteries. There was two missionaries who went around the world locally, Saint Comgall and Saint Columbanus. I mean, there's a story that allegedly it was between somewhere in Northern Ireland and Rome to build the Vatican, but I don't think that was probably true. But apparently, Ireland in general was, sort of massive in the early Christian church, and obviously there was the whole St. Patrick thing and whatnot. And I think St. Patrick was a real person. To what degree the stories are true, I'm not too sure about driving out the snakes and whatnot. But he obviously was, and there were a lot of sort of Christian missionaries coming out of Ireland. And then because Ireland has always been such a key place for people wanting to attack England, I mean, we've got a lot of archaeology from the likes of the Vikings as well, which is pretty cool. You can see still where the Vikings would have come up, where they would have. I mean, the Bangor where I'm from, the Vikings used to plunder here in their droves. So there is a lot of history. There's a lovely drive down to. I live in County Down, which has a lot of the links with St. Patrick. He's meant to be buried in Downpatrick. But there's just something very ancient about driving all around the loch down there because people have just, lived in civilizations for, like you say, thousands of years here. And you can almost kind of feel it. I think there is something a little bit mystical about some of the place.
Right. Right. And so is it, let's see, so Ireland has stories and ancient lore, legends, and things like that. Are you familiar with any of those stories and
Yeah.
the legends? How about
Oh yeah.
if you share a little bit of that with us?
Yeah, I mean, there's some good ones, and I quite enjoyed, in a few of my books, have kind of sometimes weaved them in. Just it can maybe be from a character telling the story, or from somebody having an association with the story. But there's so many good ones. I'm sure you've heard of the Giant's Causeway, have you? Yeah, the North Coast.
Which one?
The Giant's Causeway. It's a World Heritage Site, and we have this very unusual type of rock, and it all is formed in hexagons and these massive pillars. It goes all the way out into the sea, and there's all these cliffs made of these pillars. It's because of the way that the lava had solidified.
Right. Okay. So
millions of years ago, and it kind of goes out into the sea, and there's a similar stretch over in Scotland that probably would have, I suppose, joined at one point. But the legend, so it very much is like a causeway that goes out, and like it's one of our biggest tourist attractions. It's beautiful scenery all around. But the legend is that there was a giant called Finn McCool. Is this ringing any bells? No.
So
No.
a giant.
So there was a giant lived in around Bushmills. It's all around Bushmills where the whiskey's from as well.
Okay.
It's all within a couple of miles. So Finn McCool lived in Bushmills, probably having a drop of whiskey, and there was a bad sort of giant lived in Scotland called Ben and Donner, and they started kind of gesturing to each other across the Irish Sea, giving each other rude gestures or whatever. So Finn McCool thought he would go over and give him a thump. So he started throwing all these rocks down. Supposedly that's how they supposedly got out into the sea, rather than it being volcanic rock. And he built the causeway. And then when he made it to Scotland, he looked up and he realised that Ben and Donner was a much bigger giant, many times his size. So then he thought, screw this, and fled back to Northern Ireland. And then Ben and Donner saw him, and he started chasing him across the causeway to go across to Ireland. And whenever Finn McCool got back to his cabin, his wife, he said, "What am I going to do?" So she dressed him up like a baby and put a bonnet on his head and put him in a massive crib. And then when Ben and Donner came back across looking for Finn, she said, "No, my husband's not here, but this is our son." And then when he looked at the baby and said, well, if that's the baby, I don't want to fight the husband. And then he ran back to Scotland. And that's why there's no causeway left, because he ripped it up as he ran back to Scotland, apparently.
That's cool. That's funny. A
It's
little
quite a
bit
nice
of comedy,
story.
right? In that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of ones like that, and there's all these legends of famous fighters like Cuchulainn and people like that. I mean, they're just folk tales, but and some of them are they're pretty dark. Uh, and there's lots of ghost stories and I suppose things like that. But it's interesting. That's what I
So,
suppose everywhere has it.
and you said that you try to weave some of those into your stories in ways, like
Yeah,
okay. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about your book Witness, because that's what kind of connected us originally.
yeah,
Can you just give a synopsis of what the book is about? I've already started reading it, so I know, but I want you to just give
yeah,
anybody who's listening kind of the elevator uh, the elevator pitch. Yeah, are you familiar with that term?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm always having to write those,
Right.
trying to distill it down.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the actual the book's sitting about here somewhere, but the elevator pitch for Witness is well, the sort of shortest bit is uh, God created the world in 7 days, and Pastor Tom destroyed his own world in 7 days. And the idea is wanting to see how far can a good man go in the wrong direction and do some pretty bad things, and what do we think about him once he's done that, and if he truly believes he's working for his God, you know, should we sympathize with him or should we not? And I'm interested in things. You know the likes of Breaking Bad. I really enjoy Breaking Bad because you take this fairly orderly teacher and turn him into a shocking villain. But it was interesting doing something a bit different because we're in that, Heisenberg kind of wanted to be this master villain, but I was interested if somebody really doesn't want to be a bad guy, but he keeps on making bad decisions. I just wanted to sort of see how bad could you get. So in this story, it's based around a kind of evangelical pastor in a fairly rough part of Belfast, and he's trying to connect with the youth in the area, and he's trying to sort of get help with the deprivation and some of the I suppose darker things that are still going on in the sectarianism. He's trying to make a difference,
So
but then things just
was it
keep
during
on
the
going wrong.
time of the Troubles? Is it set during the
No,
time of the Troubles?
it's set now, so it's kind of like a post Troubles one. So it sort of shows you where we are now, where we're not meant to be in any kind of war, and yet there are still paramilitary groups who run different cities and different towns, and there's still a lot of crime which are instigated by paramilitaries. And unfortunately, a lot of paramilitaries who no longer go out and fight and bomb each other, a lot of them then ended up dealing in drugs or protection money, and so literally so many businesses still you have a knock on the door and it's like, give me money or we'll burn you down, and that's still the norm,
Does
unfortunately.
that still happen?
Yeah, but it's scary. Even in places like Bangor, I've heard of people being put out of business because they can't afford the protection money. It just seems ridiculous,
Wow.
and the police seemingly aren't able to do much about this. I mean,
Or they
even
could
things
be
like
in the pocket of these mafioso type people.
yeah, oh yeah, I mean yeah, because there's always been like through the troubles, there's always been a lot of collusion in all different ways. There absolutely has, and that's why there's so many inquiries all the time. When there's been recent ones, because undoubtedly the police and the army did a lot of bad things during the troubles. Obviously not all of them, but they did. Many innocent people were killed by the security services. That's just a fact, unfortunately. But obviously sometimes it was also because they were very young kids from England, and they shouldn't have been put in the situation they're in either. And they're certainly referring to life, and sometimes they were being shot at by people. I mean, it was just an awful situation. But certainly, I think if you're being rational about it, you should admit that there was fault on all sides. And
Mhm.
I think the problem I have here sometimes is it's like some people say, the Brits never did anything wrong, and some people say, the IRA were just fighting a good fight. But I think if you're being honest, you have to say there was, terrible things done in all different places that should never have happened. But the whole reconciliation is a difficult thing because it's how deep do you dig, because you can really never stop,
How
which
do
is
you
another sort of problem I have at the minute. And I suppose
how do you compensate people who have had their entire family wiped out because whether it was
Yeah,
a bomb, a terrorist bomb, or whether it was a police action where the military people were just shooting uh, without any kind of uh, you know they were just trying to make a point, and they were shooting into a building trying to get one bad guy, and they wipe out a bunch of
yeah.
innocent people. That's it. How do you compensate
Oh
the
yeah. I
people
mean,
who suffer those losses? That's what the problem is.
yeah, it's a possibility. Sometimes it's just even the being honest about it, because we had a big. I mean, there's always different sort of reports and investigations. There was a big one recently about a terrible one where police and army clearly were just shooting innocent Catholics who weren't doing anything wrong and were shooting them in the back,
Mm.
and that clearly did happen. And there's been a bit of an apology, but it hasn't been the best apology. Whereas a few years ago, you probably heard of Bloody Sunday, which was a terrible event where again peaceful protesters were shot dead, and they really haven't done anything wrong. And there was a good apology from the Prime Minister David Cameron at the time, and he did go quite far. And I think sometimes people just even need that, just the actual, just admitting that yes, we did something wrong,
Yeah.
because I suppose it's just trying to get to a bit of the truth and people to see that. But that's it. I mean, even though I don't feel like uh, I don't feel like I was in the heart of the troubles at all. But still, it still did impact. Like I said, I can remember the streets getting blown up where I lived, and I mean, a relative of mine worked for the prison service, and he was getting out to his car, and every morning, everybody in the prison service or in the police, it was just a habit. Everybody would go out and check under their car for bombs. So you got up, you made your tea, you had your slice of toast, and then you checked for bombs under the car. That's just what you did. And he was doing that one morning, and then two masked men walked around the driveway, and then just opened fire and killed him in front of his wife and kid. There's just so many examples of that. Probably everybody here will know somebody like that. Even the time there was the bomb in Bangor, a friend of mine was working in a bar off the main street, and the police said there'd been a bomb scare and you need to close up. But there were bomb scares all the time, and usually there wasn't a bomb, so people stopped taking them seriously. And he walked down this alleyway and started pulling down the shutter, whistling to himself kind of haphazardly. And just as he pulled the shutter down in front of his face, the bomb went off outside, and it blew him up uh, the whole alleyway to the very top. But luckily, he had just got it down from his face, and he only had superficial injuries, but it physically blew him right up to the other side of the street. So I
Wow.
mean, it was scary times, and I suppose I'm
So
fortunate that I
even
wasn't
even flying that
older
far of a
to be more
distance,
aware
he
of it, I
he
suppose.
survived. So your friend that was blown up, he survived it, even though he was
But
thrown such far distance. Are you still-
yeah, he went to hospital, but he wasn't.
So I think we're having a little bit of a delay on the
Yeah, he was
connection.
physically sort of blown and thrown, but he actually remarkably didn't have too many injuries, considering it. He was very lucky because obviously a lot of the people. He was very lucky, but a lot of other people obviously weren't so lucky, and I think that's why we now have this boom in crime fiction, because I would imagine that during the height of the Troubles, the last thing you'd want to sit down around about crime in Northern Ireland and bombings and murders, because it was very much part of your day. Like the news was just filled with it every day. There was always bombings and killings and kidnappings, and so I think that's why naturally, because the whole point of crime fiction is you kind of enjoy the thrill of it. It's like going on a ride. That's what a book's about, and particularly a crime fiction book. You want to have a thrill, but you can't enjoy a crime thrill if you're already, scared in your daily life, and you're not gonna. I suppose the part of a book. That's why people enjoy reading books about other countries or in other situations, because you want to throw yourself into a different world. And I think that's why we suddenly have this boom where we're getting lots of great writers, because it was also stifled. Like we were saying earlier, there wasn't the creativity, and now there's all sorts going on, which is great, and and it shines a light on the place. That Lee Child, who writes the Jack Reacher novels, his dad was from Belfast, and he referred to it as the most noir place on earth, because there is something very kind of dark about here, but also there's a certain degree where people, probably because of the troubled past, you kind of just get on with things too, and you know people have a certain roughness and certain resilience. I think here, I'm sure is definitely a part of that, because it's sort of like, well, it could be worse. just get on and have the crack or whatever. That's what people say.
Yeah, it seems like that would happen inevitably. I mean, you can only stay angry for so long, and then you just have to do something to move your life forward, um,
Yeah,
or else you're going to turn to back to violence. You don't want that. So
yeah.
you mentioned in our pre-interview conversation, you had mentioned that you're working on a new book that's going to be out in 2022. You want to talk a little bit about that one?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's going to be one. It's going to be called The Wolf is at Your Door, and I took the title from a Hannah Wolf song. And I've always set all my books in Northern Ireland, and I suppose it's a weaker thing about writing about what you know. But I'm a huge fan of particularly American crime fiction and American thriller movies, and I mean certainly like American culture is something that we is like a part of our culture, because we watch so much TV, read so many books. People do feel connected to America here. Um, I know quite a few writers from here have written books set in America. Steve Cavett from Lisbon, he writes really cool high concept thrillers set in New York, about an attorney. Uh, and Stuart Neville, he set a few books over there too. It was something I hadn't wanted to do, because you're kind of just worried to do that in case you get it wrong and whatnot. But so this is the first one I have set. I've actually set it in the 80s in America. There's just something about that era that I thought worked. It's basically a serial killer thriller. Kind of track down this killer who the press and the police don't think is probably a real person. But these plaques start appearing in Central Park on the backs of benches, and they're like weird little poems, and it almost sounds like people might have got killed. But because so many people go missing in New York, nobody's quite sure if these people are going, and no bodies ever turn up. And then it's about a kind of weird conflict, because I didn't want to have a book where it's just the detective, chasing down the serial killer, or even the journalist and whatnot. So in this book, there's actually a heister is putting on different heists in New York, and cheat a bit by having a Northern Irish character. He's originally from Belfast, and he goes to New York because he wants to get away from the troubles. But he's a professional criminal putting on robberies, and whenever a part of his gang just happens to get caught up with the serial killer and goes missing, he starts trying to track her down, and that leads him to realizing that some of these rumors are true, and it sets him on a course where it's kind of like a bit of a chase type thing, where he's trying to track down the serial killer while still trying to carry on with his own illegal heists. So this, hopefully, it's a bit of a different spin on the serial killer thriller.
That's a really different spin, yeah. And so you're pitting basically an anti-hero bad guy slash, bad guy. I mean, he's a bank robber, so he's not really a hero
Yeah,
in any way.
no, no.
You're pitting a bad guy against a really bad guy.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've tried. I suppose I've probably, as you have to do, I've tried to make him quite sympathetic.
Sure.
But he still has a heister. He's still, he's on the wrong side of the law and whatnot. But the other guy is really horrible. I put everything into him to make him really nasty, really. I suppose I was going for that kind of really freaky serial killer, kind of, the kind of Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill type person, that type of killer you really wouldn't want to come across. So it was good fun to write, and I'm working with a new publisher for that one. And then in between time, yeah, I had this where it worked out. I had two books out during lockdown, so I didn't get to do any. Usually would do different events, so that was just the way it worked out. But I was able to do some online stuff, and I've been doing some short stories. But there's actually one you might get a kick out of. It went up last week on there's a free literary magazine online called Punk Noir. If you come
Yeah.
across that Punk Noir magazine,
Yeah.
And I wrote one last week called Devolution Z, about uh, it's kind of about the troubles in the late 2000s where the politicians. It's very tongue in cheek, kind of black humor. It's about what was mentioned the first time when Paisley and McGuinness started to talk about sharing power. And I really like what actually happened on that day was that there's a terrorist called Michael Stone, who was very famous because he went to an IRA funeral in the 80s and started throwing grenades at people standing in the cemetery,
Wow.
which is just kind of insane on every level. But
Mhm.
he was released on a Good Friday, and what actually happened on that day in real life, he turned up at Stormont armed with bombs and a knife and a gun, and he tried to get into Stormont to attack the politicians.
Hmm.
But he got absolutely his backside whipped by a security guard. And she was like, just looked like a very ordinary sort of maybe middle-aged, quite small woman, and she just absolutely just frisked him around, straight down on the floor, and this big bruising famous paramilitary was just the wind knocked out of him. So that's where my short story starts, and then it also happens to coincide with a zombie apocalypse.
Nice.
just for just for a bit of fun, and I just had a bit of fun writing with it. So what would happen if suddenly there's zombies landing in Stormont, and the politicians have to kind of fight them off? So it's a bit of a kind of fun one.
Yeah, that does sound like a good one. Yeah, I'm familiar with the with that little online magazine, Punk Noir. There's several of those,
Yeah,
and
it's really good. We've got some good stuff.
do you do a lot of short stories and submit to those type of online publications like that?
Yeah, but I mean, I used to do more of that, and I haven't done so much short stories for a few years because I've been concentrating on the novels and working with different publishers and just trying to, keep the whole thing going. So I haven't had as much time. But I actually found whenever COVID hit, and we were all, working from home and looking after the kids and doing that type of stuff, I couldn't concentrate for ages on my novel. I think when everything was going so crazy in the world, I couldn't sit down and concentrate. But I found I could concentrate in short stories, so I just ended up placing quite a few short stories in the last year, and sometimes it almost feels like a bit of a palate cleanser. If you're working on a big manuscript of, you know, 70 or 80,000 words, sometimes it's nice to spend a few nights working on something completely different. It almost feels like a treat because you can get, so caught up in the writing, and I mean, it's a very enjoyable thing to do, but it is hard work, and some nights you just can't be bothered. But if you can't be bothered, you'll never get the book finished. So I am
Right.
quite disciplined, but it is nice to kind of give yourself a little treat. Like I'm just gonna write about zombies and Stormont tonight, just for a bit of fun.
Well, being an author is a lot like being an artist, and you don't have to be the
Am I
greatest
frozen here?
writer.
Am I
But
frozen? Nope.
say what? Did I freeze up? I think we're having a bit of a delay in our connection because you keep freezing up.
Oh, oh, are you hello?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, oh, it all went frozen on my end there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it was frozen on my end too for a minute. Can you
Oh,
hear me now?
all right, okay, good. Yeah,
So
grand.
we're okay. Okay, great. Well, what I was going to do is ask you for your final thoughts. Is if there's any message that you want to get across to the listeners, and just we'll close it out after that.
Yeah, cheers. No, thank you. It's been really fun actually. Just talking about some of my experiences. And it's interesting talking to someone who doesn't have the perspective from here because I suppose in this busy world you never have a chance much to reflect on where you're from and what your surroundings are like to a certain extent. And I think when you do talk about Northern Ireland, you do realize how crazy it is because it is difficult to understand because it just doesn't really, not so much of it just doesn't make mistakes. And I think the way the history has gone, nobody could predict it, and it's certainly nothing's very black and white. So it is an interesting place, but I would very much recommend anybody come and visit, we're very friendly, and you can come and do a free tour if you make it over to Northern Ireland. But it's a lovely place to visit, and like people say, it is friendly, and the cracks 90, as people say over here. I mean, lots of nice pubs, lots of nice things to do. But no, it's been fun having a chat.
How's the beer? I heard you guys make really good beer over there.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nice ones. I mean, obviously, like I really like Guinness, and there's a class Guinness factory in Dublin, and you can go up to the Sky Building, like a 360 glass where you can overlook Dublin, and they pour you uh, a Guinness which has actually been brewed on the site and just from a keg sitting right under the bar, so it's got nowhere to travel. It is lovely.
Wow.
I'm also a fan of whiskey, so Bushmills is very close, and I mean it's a real nice one, and Jameson's as well. Yeah, I mean I think it was the 1600s they started getting a license for Bushmills, so they've been doing it quite a while. They've gotten pretty good at it.
Yeah. Well, it is a place I would certainly love to visit, and when I do, I'm going to say that like that. When I do visit, I'll look you up, and I'll get the tour.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah, absolutely. We're working to get a tour, get some sort of gig going there.
yeah, that'll be fun, man. We'll play some music together, and take a tour, try some of the pubs, and drink some of the beer. Um, but yeah, it's been a great pleasure talking to you, Simon. I appreciate you coming on the
And you?
program, sharing your experiences. Ireland is a fascinating place, and I think we just barely scratched the surface of the depth and complexity and just the beauty of that country. I mean,
Yeah,
there's so much more that we could talk about. In fact, I'd love to have you back on. Maybe when you start the book tour for your next book, you could come back on.
yeah. That was. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, because I'll be able to tell you bit more about it then, and the one I'm working on now. Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. Cheers.
Great. Okay, well, with that, Simon, I think we'll go
Oh,
ahead
am
and
I
close it
speaking?
out. Yeah, it keeps
Oh,
freezing
technical
up.
difficulties.
So yeah, we're having a pretty bad delay, and which is okay because we're gonna end it right here. But thank you
Yeah, I
again,
think it's
and
gonna go
everybody in
again.
the chat room. Thank you. Sorry for these technical difficulties. Simon's in the middle of a storm over there in Ireland,
Cheers
so
again, Andrew.
yeah, appreciate it, man.
Cheers. Good to talk to you. Thanks, everybody. All the best.